After my last video, a friend of mine added a comment that said, I wish I could taste the honey and the fruit and the things you're talking about, but honestly, all I taste when I drink whiskey is whiskey. I thought, good point. I have that problem too, so I figured let's do an episode on how to taste whiskey. Let's do this. Hi, welcome back to Whisky Riffs. I'm Kevin, and today we're going to learn how to taste whiskey. Now, why even bother to learn anything about tasting whiskey? Why not just enjoy the whiskey? Well, one thing I've found from learning more about whiskey and learning more about how to taste it, how to get all the little nuances out of it, was how to enjoy not just the initial whiskeys I tried, but it let me experiment with other whiskeys and find more ways to enjoy the different types of whiskey and to explore the deeper flavors and really kind of improve the way I spend time with a dram of whiskey. And there's nothing wrong with improving time with a dram of whiskey. I'm no expert at whiskey tasting. In fact, on the range of can spot all the different flavors down to it tastes like whiskey, I'm probably in the lower half to third. I'm not that nuanced at flavors and tastes, but there's ways you can improve that, and there's ways that I've been trying to improve that. When I first started getting into tasting whiskeys and learning more about what I was actually tasting, I got this book, The Whiskey Cabinet by Mark Bylock, and it really helped. It talks about how to taste whiskey, it talks about how whiskeys are made, why they're different, what grains go into the different types. It's a really helpful book, especially if you want to know more about deep knowledge about whiskey, or you just want to find a little bit more information about how to taste and how to actually enjoy whiskeys more. So this is worthwhile. I'd say pick it up if you're getting into whiskey tasting. Another great resource for learning about whiskey and learning about tasting whiskey is YouTube, obviously. One of the first channels that I found was the Whiskey Vault. Daniel and Rex are the hosts, and they are entertaining, they're funny, and they even started a new channel a couple of years after the initial one called the Whiskey Tribe, which also involved them starting their own distillery, which Crowded Barrel, it's the shirt I've got on. Watching them is an entertaining way of learning about whiskey without taking it too seriously. They're just a lot of fun. So I'll put some links in the description below so you can go check out their channels. Let's start with the process of tasting a whiskey. Similar to the way that you would enjoy wine by nosing it, you can do the same thing with whiskey. And that is the first experience that we really have with foods or drinks. Our nose senses what the flavors are going to be, and you can do the same thing here with whiskey. So if I have a glass of whiskey and I'm using a glass that is going to help me experience the whiskey, which is tulip-shaped glass, either like the Norland glasses that I use most of the time, or a Glencairn glass, and this has water in it. I'll show you why in a little bit. If you're just drinking a mixed drink, you know, there's tumblers and other things that are fine for that. But these kind of glasses with that shape, they funnel the aromas up to your nose and do a really great job of letting you get in there and experience what you're going to taste. Now, before you just dive into a glass with your nose, you want to be careful with it. This is a high alcohol whiskey. The one I've got in my glass right now is Elijah Craig small batch, which is at 61.1% alcohol. So it's 122.2 proof. And that's not something you want to jam up your nose. You do want to start slow. Just bring it close to your nose and then pull it away and then do it again. I'm leaving my mouth open a little bit so I can let the alcohol vapors kind of move about so they don't just clog up my nose so I can't smell anything but alcohol. So right away I get caramel, kind of a nutty honey and sweet. Now that's the Elijah Craig, where a totally different experience, Green Spot, which is pot still Irish whiskey. It's going to be a very different nose, a very different experience for how they make the whiskey. And immediately on this one, I get apple, like a Macintosh or something that's semi-sweet but not too sweet. Tasting and nosing is basically, you have to know what the smells are if you're going to say what they are. So if there is a fruit in here that I'm not familiar with, I am not going to get that note. It's not going to come out. So basically, my vocabulary of the things that I could say about whiskey is limited to the things I can say about food and environment. So maybe some of them are more earthy. This one might have a little more of that damp, musty smell to me. More of a damp wood smell. And there may be something else in there, but that's all I'm getting because that's the flavor profile that is in my head. I don't know. Someone would say, well, I can smell apricots. Well, I don't eat a lot of apricots. I rarely eat them, so I don't have that in my head. But I do have apple, and this is definitely apple. Now, these are both pretty mild whiskeys, so I can go through and do a tasting of both of these back to back and probably not have any problem getting the nuances of each one. If I were to take something like a Laphroaig or a very peaty, smoky whiskey and then try to pair it up next to an Irish whiskey or a sweet bourbon, I might lose all those nuances because I'm not going to get that after that smoke and that peat. It might take over my senses and I might lose the ability to pick out all the little touches and nuances here. Now, one thing that you might see on some whiskey videos is somebody swirling the glass. It's not a good idea with whiskey. It's a wine thing. Wine has 12 to 17% alcohol, where we're talking 40, 50, 60% and more alcohol in these. You can swirl it a little bit, but don't put your nose right in at that moment. Now, when you first taste whiskey, you might get a lot of alcohol burn. You don't want to take a big gulp. Think of it as hot tea or hot coffee. Little sip, swallow it. Don't let it sit on your tongue too long. You're going to end up with just tasting alcohol. Whiskey will taste like whiskey. So that first taste was a lot of alcohol burn. I didn't get a lot of flavors but I do have this long burn now, so I have this finish in my throat, in my chest. It actually feels in my chest with this one. 61% alcohol will do that to you. Second taste. Wow, there it goes. So really nutty, really wood spice, very sweet cinnamon. I'm getting cinnamon on this. Let's try the green spot. Still apple front forward on the nose. Now that's much easier on the first taste because I believe this is a fairly low, yeah, this is 40% alcohol, which 80 proof is the minimum for whiskey. That is not going to give you the same kind of burn as a small batch cask strength bourbon, or what they call it, barrel proof on theirs. Sounds more manly when you say barrel proof, I guess. I don't know. Sorry. That has some citrus notes. It's got I can still taste some of the apple on the taste. There's butter. It's got a tanginess to it, so that's I would relate that to citrus. An expert might be tearing this apart and finding all these different flavors. And the finish on this is it's not short, but it's not as aggressive. I don't feel it going down. I can still taste it, and there's a lingering flavor, but it's not that, wow, I can feel it all the way down in my chest type finish. And if you have a whiskey that is a higher proof, that's where water comes in. And you can do it on spill the whiskey. No. You can do it on any whiskey, but it's good to do on some of the cask strength or barrel proof whiskeys because they may open up a little bit more when you add some water to them. Now, I just use filtered water. It's best to use distilled or filtered or something that doesn't have the chlorine and the added tap water effects in it. You don't have to have anything special. I'm using an eyedropper because it's easier. You can just use a glass straw or something like that. This one has actual markings on it, but I rarely even deal with those. And you just want to start off with a few drops, 5 or 6 drops for something that size, and then let it sit for a second. Here's where you can maybe swirl a little bit and then wait. Got sweeter. I'm not getting hit with the alcohol as much. Oh man. Oh, that's butterscotch. That's what that is. Yeah, there's still a little bit of nuttiness, but the butterscotch comes through more. The flavor didn't change as much for me as the nose did. The nose changed dramatically. Let me put a little bit more water in there and see what happens. Now this is 61%, so it can take a good amount of water. I actually like this one with a little bit of water. I typically drink whiskeys without adding water. When I'm tasting whiskeys, a lot of times I'll add water to try to open them up. Now I don't know what this will do to the 40% Irish whiskey. We'll see. Still getting the apple, get a little bit more butter. The taste is less interesting. Even though that was a very little bit of water, it lost some of the edge for me. Green Spot's one of my favorite Irish whiskeys, but I won't put water in it. This was a good experiment for the video, but not on a daily basis. But straight, I highly recommend Green Spot, especially if you like Irish whiskeys, or apples, or butter. If you want to add ice to whiskey, it's probably best to take a whiskey that can handle it. Most bourbons and ryes are better at handling ice than something like an Irish whiskey or a Highland Scotch. Sometimes they fade so quickly with that ice because think of the little drops of water I was adding here. When you put an ice cube in whiskey, you're adding a lot of water constantly. It's melting, the water's continuing to dilute it as it sits there. So you will have a much different flavor, a much different taste 10 minutes after you put the ice cube in there versus 2 minutes. And if you're still nursing that whiskey a half an hour later, the ice will dramatically change the flavor of it. You're going to lose a lot of the whiskey flavor. It's just science. I hope you found this educational, entertaining. Drinking whiskey has become more of an experience. The more I learn about it, the more I understand it, the more I explore it. It is enjoyable to just sit and have the glass and take the time to appreciate everything that's gone into this wonderful liquid that took years to produce and many, many skilled people. Cheers. I went up my nose. I took too big a taste. Remember how I told you not to take too big a gulp? I let it sit on my palate too long and it kind of went up into my sinus cavity. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. God. All right. Good job, Kev.